Thanks, Kathleen. Um, as Kathleen was saying, Julie used to be the president of Apalahee Audubon, so many of you may know her already. As Kathleen noted, she's the executive director of Audubon Florida. She joined Audubon Florida in 2005 and has successfully led statewide conservation and wildlife policies initiatives there. In her time at Audubon Florida, Julie has built out the organization's robust coastal conservation program. She's coordinated Audubon's response to the Deepwater Horizon disaster, and she's helped secure millions in funding for protecting Florida's land and water resources. Before joining Audubon, Julie worked for the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, where she created the Great Florida Birding Trail. I work very closely with that position, and it's still just a very robust thing that's happening in the state. It's a really cool program at FWC. And as Kathleen said, she once served as the president of Audubon. I think she's one of 2 executive directors that have come out of our chapters. So the last 2, so that's awesome. Yeah, Eric Draper was a lot other before Julie. Yeah. So if anyone here has worked with Julie, she's a joy to work with. She has a tireless passion for conservation. She really knows her stuff. She's got a great attitude. A lot of times when you're talking to people that lead these organizations, you feel like you can't approach them. I've never had a problem approaching Julie since the first day I've met her. You just walk right up to her. She's got that great smile and just joyful. So she's a wonderful person, and we're very lucky to have her tonight. So tonight she's going to talk to us a little bit about what Audubon Florida does, some strategies for doing conservation advocacy, and some of the wins that Audubon Florida has had and our Audubon chapters as across the state. So thanks, Julie.
Thank you, Ben. It's like old. So did I do that right? Oh, gold star. All right. So thanks again. It's good to see so many familiar faces, and hopefully there's even more on Zoom. Isn't this a wonderful world that we are in now, that we can do this remotely as well as in person? Okay. So as Ben said, I'm Julie Wraithmell. I'm the executive director of Audubon Florida. We are the state's oldest statewide conservation organization. We will be 125 years old next year. And we are, sorry, I'm so distracted. I'll be just fine. We care deeply about Florida, as I'm sure you guys do too. So as you know, we are kind of an uncommon state. Think about it. We've got 67 counties covering about 66,000 square miles. We have the longest coastline of any state in the lower 48. And in fact, our Panhandle coastline is longer than that of North Carolina. We are growing by leaps and bounds. Since 1980, we have doubled our population. So we're at about 22 million now. And at the same time, 5 times that number of people visit us annually. Lots of folks loving this special place. We are also surrounded on 3 sides by rising warming seas, and we are the country's flattest state. So lots of challenges, lots of opportunities. And I tell people that, yes, we are the state of internet meme fame and swampland scams and hanging chads and invasive pythons and sinkholes and hurricanes, but we are also a state of astronauts and cowboys and a state of the world's largest comprehensive ecosystem restoration, the Everglades. We are the place where the National Wildlife Refuge System was founded. And we are also the crucible in which Audubon was born. So if you're not familiar, around the end of the 1800s, early 1900s, Florida's wading birds were being hunted to extinction. Their feathers were being used in the millinery trade, so on women's hats and fashion. And hunters would take them at just the time of year when their breeding finery was the most beautiful, when they also had chicks in their nest. And so by killing the parents, it also killed the chicks, and their populations declined precipitously. And it wasn't It wasn't hard to understand why. At the time, feathers were worth more than their weight in gold. And Florida was a growing place and people needed resources. Luckily, there were a lot of folks that also sat back and said, this isn't right. We have to be sustainable. And they came together and ultimately hired wardens and passed local laws. This is actually Guy Bradley, who is credited with galvanizing the movement. He actually gave his life in the line of duty. He was killed by poachers in 1905. And it was his death and that of Columbus McLeod, another warden in Charlotte Harbor a few years later, that really moved people to ultimately pass the Migratory Bird Treaty Act in 1918. This is a really important protection that continues to this day. And Audubon was founded in 1900 from people, everyday Floridians and others, saying something has got to change. So coming from that place, some of our earliest work in Florida after the wardens was scientists. Audubon is at its heart a science organization. This is Bob Allen, who would camp on Bottle Key for months at a time, studying roseate spoonbills and donating blood to the local mosquitoes. I'm sure you can imagine just how robust a donation he likely made. Today, instead of looking like this, Audubon Florida looks like this. So this is our research station in the Florida Keys in Tavernier that studies the community ecology of Florida Bay and is used to drive the design and operation of comprehensive Everglades restoration projects. Researchers and land managers also in Southwest Florida at our Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary, which celebrates 70 years this year. So this is 13,000 acres, 20 square miles of wild Florida, and it's also got a 2.25 mile boardwalk that 100,000 visitors enjoy every year, getting to see the heart of the largest old growth cypress stand remaining in the country. We have our Center for Birds of Prey in Orlando, which is a raptor rehabilitation facility, as well as a educational facility, a robust coastal conservation program with staff and volunteers around the state, helping to monitor and manage more than 300 beach and island and rooftop nesting sites for wading birds and coastal shorebirds. And then we also have our policy program. And so this is not just going to the US Capitol or going to the Florida Capitol, but it means spending time in the field with decision makers, helping them to not just understand intellectually, but to see and feel viscerally what the issues are that our state is facing. Nevertheless, being based here in Tallahassee, as you might imagine, I spend a bit of time in this location. Also, we have staff as part of National Audubon who work in DC and the US Capitol. And it's this structure of Audubon that makes us so effective. So we go from the local level with 45 independent chapters throughout the state, a state office with 100 staff statewide, researchers, resource managers, educators, and policy wonks. And then, of course, National Audubon Society, which helps us to address issues at a national and, in fact, a hemispheric level. So what I thought I would share with you guys a little bit tonight, one of the questions that I get most often is, I've got this problem and I need to get it fixed. How do I get it fixed? And I think sometimes advocacy can be intimidating, and it doesn't have to be. And so I wanted to share a little bit of background, but also some of kind of the core values of Audubon and our advocacy style. Every group does it a little bit differently. Of course, I'm partial and think ours is best. And so I will share with you, and of course you will think so too. So the first thing that I wanted to share is I think everybody has seen some version of it or another of Schoolhouse Rock, how a bill becomes a law. You guys understand how it moves through that process, but what a lot of folks miss is what happens after that. So one of the most important things in advocacy is figuring out at what level to engage. So after that bill becomes a law, after the legislature passes a bill, it creates or updates a state statute. And then that state statute ends up telling the agency that's responsible how they need to, or that they need to go implement it. Well, it doesn't always give all of the guidance and structure and how-tos. So the agency takes that statute and fleshes out the legislature's mandate in the course of rulemaking. And so they create a rule. Well, after they've created that rule, you can imagine there may be permits involved, there may be enforcement involved, there may be certain parameters, and the agency staff that are responsible for that implementation may still have to make some judgment calls in the course of implementing that rule. And we call that level incipient agency policy. And basically that just means the implementer making those realistic judgment calls based on what the intent of the rule and the statute are. And then finally, they will apply all of these things, the statute, rule, and the agency policy, to a specific application, whether it is a permit application or it's an enforcement action. So all of this is a little bit obtuse, so I thought I would give you a purely hypothetical and slightly ridiculous example with, you know, the legislature first passes a bill saying that these blue lawn flamingos are absolutely horrendous. Lawn flamingos henceforth shall be accurate in Florida because it's important that people are excellent about their bird identification. Okay, but that's basically the extent of the direction the legislature gives them. So then the completely made up Agency for Statutory Accuracy will designate 4 designs as acceptable and then create an application for the approval of new designs, including looking at the color of the new designs and the neck to body length ratios, okay? So once they've done that, then the staff of the agency have to implement it. And they make the judgment call that once a design has been approved, subsequent iterations don't really need to be approved. There really isn't a way to make somebody come back for a renewal. So that's how they're going to handle it. Well, here's the problem. So you, living in Tallahassee, suddenly see your neighbors put out a whole flock of plastic lawn flamingos, okay? They ordered them from an approved vendor, but this is like a new run, a new production run. And the bills have come out looking like toucans, okay? All of the neighborhood kids suddenly think that this is what flamingos look like, and somebody's gotta do something. So at what level should you really be engaging? I will tell you that it is always easiest to work from the lowest level. So the first thing is to find that person in the Agency of Statutory Accuracy who is responsible for this and ask them, can they really do this? And it may come back that they say, well, gosh, you know, technically that design was approved, but it looks like maybe we need to have some kind of a renewal process if there are subsequent print runs made. So maybe this is something we can just handle at the agency policy level, and we will make that, we'll put that clearly in the permits that we issue. Or they may say to you, gosh, you know, I don't know about this. It's not really in our rule. It just says color and neck to body ratios. It doesn't say anything about bills. So it may require rulemaking, and that means working with the agency to update their rule to make sure that the bills are factored in. Or they may say, gosh, you know, we really don't feel comfortable with that. The legislature was silent on it. At which point, seriously, you're going to make me go to the legislature to get them to talk about plastic lawn flamingo bills. But maybe, you know, and normally that's when it is a bigger, thornier issue. But of course, you can see it's much easier to engage with that staff person on tweaking the agency policy than going through a real rulemaking process, or bigger of all, going through legislative bill passage. So another resource that I think is really important for people to be aware of is that you can find the statutes, the agency rules, and local ordinances for your local government, your town or your county, online very easily. And one of the nice things about all of these resources is that they have keyword searches. So if you want to figure out, maybe you don't even know what agency is responsible for something that you're worried about, you can type that word, flamingos or lawn art, in and see what pops up. You know, what agency is ultimately engaging in rulemaking, and that's who you need to contact. It also is an important resource, I think, particularly in Muni Code, to see good examples from other places. So sometimes you'll be talking to your city or county and you'll be thinking, gosh, you know, we don't have anything governing this issue or this problem. But you could go to Muni Code and type in that keyword and see if there's some innovative city or county elsewhere who has already addressed it and has found a tidy way of doing it. You can even call them and say, how's it going? And they'll tell you, gosh, it's great, or gosh, I really wish that we had also done this thing because it would work even better. And then you're taking that with you when you're going to advocate as an example of, look, here's a proven solution. And so that brings us to my laundry list of Audubon Florida, we will call them advocacy values, probably more than tips. And they're places that I see folks inadvertently go astray when they are engaging on issues. The first and probably most important thing is get to know your decision makers before you need them. That doesn't mean you have to go make an appointment or sit down or, you know, have a formal meeting, but if you see them at the springtime Tallahassee parade, go say hi and introduce yourself and tell them what you care about, or follow them on the platform formerly known as Twitter, or follow them on Facebook or on Instagram and engage with their posts. That doesn't mean troll them, do not troll them, but it does mean engage with them on their posts. They'll ask questions about, what do you care about? Tell them. And when they do something that you like, thank them. This way, when you need to engage with them, you already know a bit of a flavor about them, and they know a little bit about you. So you don't have to be BFFs, but just that small amount of common ground can make a huge difference. Another thing, agency staff are knowledgeable and generally want to do the right thing. So most of the agency staff, they're not doing what they do for money or respect. Let's be honest, they don't get enough of either of those. They do what they do generally because they care. And so I like to think of lobbying as that grand Canadian sport of curling, you know, that one where like they hurl the giant weight down the icy lane, trying to get it to go to the right place. So in my opinion, for a lot of agency staff, they want to get the weight onto the target. I'm using the wrong vocabulary and I'm slaughtering curling because I don't actually know anything about it. But the point is that as a lobbyist or as an advocate, your job is to brush. Your job is to brush and smooth the ice on the path because that weight wants to go to the right place, okay? That staff person wants to get it there. And so your job is to help to lower or remove barriers between the weight and the target. And a corollary to this is, like, don't beat up on staff. Like, every once in a while you see folks come in and they kind of get haughty about it. And oh God, the worst is that whole, like, you work for me thing. Like, nobody wants to hear that. And it's not going to make them think favorably about their interaction with you or your issue. So spare them, spare yourself. Your goal really is being successful in your advocacy, not a well-developed sense of self-righteousness. The next one, listen and figure out what or who motivates your decision maker or adversary. And this is to mean that the people that you are working with are not necessarily going to care about the same things that you do. And that doesn't necessarily make them wrong and you right. It just means that you're different. So where can you find ways, common ground, common cause to get to the same place? You know, they may care about public health and something that you're advocating for touches public health. Maybe they are concerned about economic development and tourism, and you can talk in terms of economics. The other thing is not assuming bad intent. A lot of times things come up and folks will automatically ascribe, oh my gosh, I know why they're doing that. They're trying to make it this. When you actually talk to them, oftentimes it's actually not that nefarious. It's a simpler explanation. It is unintended consequences. They weren't even thinking about that part of it that you're concerned about. Their focus was on something else entirely. And so the easiest situations to fix are those kind of missed connections or confusion. Now, once you find out that there really was nefarious intent, and that happens, you know, the rules change at that point. But nevertheless, you don't want to start out there because it's easier for you and you're more likely to be successful if you're able to find out what is it that they need, what is it that I need, and is there a solution that gets us both what we need? And so with that, be fair, don't throw rocks. Okay, there are a lot of groups that will throw rocks, take cheap shots, or otherwise engage in hyperbole when they are talking to the public or the media about issues. And, you know, I'll admit, like, does it feel good sometimes to like go on a tear? Of course it does. But, you know, it's kind of self-indulgent and it's counterproductive. Okay, if your decision makers know that you're going to call a spade, but you're not going to take cheap shots at them. They may not agree with you, but they will respect you and they will listen to you. And so you definitely want to hold people accountable, but you don't want to be unreasonable about it because then they come to this decision that, well, there's no pleasing them. Why should I even try? Next, lean into your credibility. So this is something really unique about Audubon. We have 45 chapters around the state. And so that means that we are local everywhere. We have members in every district and they are knowledgeable about their hometowns and their communities. And they frequently invest their sweat equity in these issues. So you guys spend lots of time volunteering, whether it's at Lake Alberta or doing cleanups or educational tabling at events. That counts. That has meaning. You're not just an armchair, you know, Monday morning quarterback telling them what it is that they should do. You are actually giving of yourselves and your time and your energy and talents, investing in this resource. And that gives you additional credibility above and beyond someone who is just, you know, a heckler in the balcony. Be constructive and come with solutions. So anyone out there who is a parent knows that when your kid comes to you and says, you're doing this wrong, you really want to be told, okay, well then tell me how to do it right, right? So come with a constructive solution when you're sharing that problem. And also it's helpful to share in the ownership of the problem too. You can imagine how confrontational it feels to have somebody coming at you and saying, there's this problem and you have to fix it, compared to, we've got this problem, let me describe it for you. Now, there's a couple different ways we could handle it, but this is one solution that I think may work best. What do you think about that? This gets you a lot further, a lot faster. And of course, it also helps to be able to say, we're using the science. So I tell people that occasionally we look like sloppy drunks at Audubon because we are weaving back and forth across the political aisle without discussion, but that is because we are following the science, not the ideology. And that counts for a lot. So lean on that science and help them understand that your intentions are not ideological. They truly are an investment in the best outcome for Florida. Engage as early as possible. So nobody likes a Johnny-come-lately, especially when everything has almost been hashed out and you start throwing bombs. Sometimes it's not possible to get in really early, you know, it hasn't come to your attention in time, and that doesn't mean don't engage if that's the case, but don't let moss grow on it. If you see an issue, engage on it early, and the agencies and decision makers will appreciate that input early enough in the process that your input can have an influence on the ultimate result. Media, be mindful of optics. So of course, this means not just the optics for your decision maker, so making sure that they enjoy the success if they are helpful, or they're held accountable if they don't. But it also means the optics of your message. So if you are working in a community where unemployment is at an all-time high, and you're seeing real problems with water quality, and there's environmental justice issues going on, sometimes it can be tone deaf if you're silent on those issues and focusing only on a particular niche conservation issue. So at the very least, acknowledging that those are concerns, and even better when there are ways to marry the issues so that a rising tide raises all ships. It goes a long way, and it helps make it easier for decision makers to partner with you on those outcomes. Keep your eye on the prize, so don't get distracted by all of the noise. There will be lots of folks that will be big about making giant hyperbolic, this is terrible, or everybody break your heirloom china in protest, and focus on what the actual steps are that are going to deliver your outcome, and don't get distracted by all of that background noise. In fact, sometimes that background noise can be your opponent creating a distraction. So staying focused is definitely key. And then say thank you. You don't have to agree with decision makers on all of their policies. You may only agree with them on one policy. Saying thank you doesn't mean that you are thanking them for everything that they do. You are saying thank you because I asked you to do this thing, you did it, and now I'm thanking you for doing it. There's a lot of folks that kind of get hung up on that bigger picture, and you can say thank you for these things, just like your mama taught you, without it being a broad endorsement of everybody's policies. Never waste a good disaster. So this means that there may be a long burning problem, but the public doesn't really get riled up about it until it reaches a crisis situation. And when that happens, their attention and concern will be time limited. And so while they're paying attention, you have to engage. And sometimes that's really hard because, especially if it's a crisis, you're probably burning the candle from both ends already. But the opportunity there is significant and fleeting. And then the last, and I'll get into some examples after this, my terrible laundry list, is if you can't win immediately, extend the timeline to keep hope alive. And so what that means is sometimes there are really bad things that are a runaway train. They are gonna pass. And you can tear your hair and gnash your teeth and do everything that you want to do to levy your concern, and it will not matter. However, if you can build in a trapdoor or some other mechanism that helps to extend the decision-making timeline, it buys you time to have another chance. The other side uses this too. You'll see a lot of times that there will be study commissions that will be created in order to delay having to actually take action on solving a problem. But what's good for the goose is good for the gander. And occasionally there are times when it's a useful tactic for us too. So here's a couple examples, a little bit of storytelling for you guys. So Deepwater Horizon. So 2010, the Macondo well, blue, oil everywhere, dead pelicans, tar balls starting to wash up in the panhandle. And what a lot of people forget is that mere days before the well blew, the legislature was on the cusp of opening Florida's nearshore waters to oil drilling. It was a runaway train. It was going to pass. And so the only thing that stopped it from happening was this, okay? So using a disaster helps to avert some things. The next thing that I wanted to share about Deepwater Horizon is this. It's the power of the Audubon network. So for those of you that were in Florida in 2010, you remember just how crazy a time that was. Not only was everybody moving in every direction at all times, but there was rumor and hysteria and people trying things experimentally, and there were significant unintended consequences. So there were booms being put in that were dragging the bottom and tearing up seagrass in places where there wasn't even oil coming ashore. Those same booms were washing ashore and blocking precocial threatened species chicks from reaching the water to feed, and they were starving. There were people surveying for oil that were landing helicopters in the middle of posted areas for imperiled species, or the Coast Guard thinking that they were areas that were marked for depositing, stores of booms instead of protecting wildlife. And the only reason that we knew about these things and that we were able to engage and kind of help the state with air traffic control was Audubon chapters. So it was Audubon chapters who were out in their communities and on their beaches who were seeing these things and reporting them in real time that we were then able to aggregate and engage with the agencies to try to address them as quickly as possible. It was also Audubon volunteers that were participating with FWC in monitoring that identified the first oiled birds that arrived on Florida's shores. So Audubon boots on the ground, it's not just a casual engagement. It's not just a way to spend your Saturday afternoon. It actually has real meaning. And because we're able to aggregate all of those data points from all of the different chapters, we're able to identify patterns as they're emerging too. Next example, who remembers MCORS? Remember that horrible name? So MCORS in 2019 was a bill that passed that directed DOT to go work on creating 3 new turnpikes. You see here the areas in yellow, green, and red. And basically these roads were kind of roads to nowhere that were going to open up areas that were largely untouched agricultural, natural areas to development. And this bill was greased. It was a runaway train. Everybody screaming about it, complaining about it. None of it was slowing it. Not just stopping it, but not even slowing it down. And so at the time we looked at it and said, this thing is going to pass. And so we have got to build something into it that is a fail-safe switch. And so what we did is at the time, we worked with a previous Senate president who was still in office and said, look, we think that you should build into the bill that there have to be task forces created and they have to have representation, including environmental groups, and their findings have to be binding. And they are also tasked with identifying whether there is a real need for these roads. Okay, so a lot of times task forces are just, they're window dressing and they make recommendations, but there's no teeth to them. The key was these had teeth. So we got that slipped into the bill before it passed, okay? Then we got Audubon staff and other partners appointed to the task forces, as well as local governments and others who were really concerned about the state shoving these giant roads down their throats. And then through the course of the task force process, worked to guide those task forces to the ultimate outcome where they came back and said, there is no need. There's no need for these roads. We suggest that if you need more capacity, you simply increase the capacity on existing roads rather than building these new ones. And similarly, we found common cause with other parts of the state. The local governments in Southeast Florida, for example, who desperately needed new roads, they were really frustrated because all of DOT's work plan was going to end up going to this stuff. So finding those allies, even if they're not necessarily from the environmental perspective, helps you to win the day. So in the end, the bill got repealed. It finally died, but I will note that this is not the first time in my career that I've seen this proposal. Okay, about 10 years earlier, it was called the Heartland Parkway. Okay, and I guarantee that we're going to see it again in the future. Okay, so bad ideas have a way of recycling, and having that institutional memory like Audubon has is really critical, because oftentimes being able to pull out that old playbook saves a lot of time and ultimately saves the day. And then the last thing that I just wanted to share as an example, I told you that a lot of the work that we do is on our coasts with coastal birds. And one of the challenges for both island nesting birds like these great egrets, as well as beach nesting birds like black skimmers, is that they need space. So if people get too close and the parents are flushed from the nest, for those island nesting wading birds, the chicks sometimes fall to the water and drown. Occasionally, for the beach nesting birds, they cook in the sun very quickly because the parents are shading them rather than incubating them, or they can be crushed underfoot. In some places where there's enough room, we work with the State Wildlife Agency, Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, to post buffers around those colonies. But one of the problems that we encounter is that for islands, when there's birds nesting on the mangroves that are overhanging the water, or there's birds nesting on the sand right up to the edge of the island, you can't post a buffer without those posts being in the water. And then you start running into problems with navigable waters. There's only one way that you can close navigable waters, and that's through the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission's Critical Wildlife Area program. So in 2016, we were talking to newly elected FWC Chairman Brian Yablonsky, who is very much a Teddy Roosevelt conservationist. And I was asking him, I was like, so, Mr. Big Guy, you're now the chairman. What is your legacy going to be? And he said, I really want to do something durable and lasting and visionary, that takes pride in FWC's leadership and responsibility for wildlife. And I said, well, you guys are the only ones that can do this critical wildlife area thing. And the agency hasn't designated any of these in 15 years. So what if we work together and designated more in 1 year than have been designated in the last 25 years combined? Ooh, you think we could do that? Well, we started to dig in and see if we could. And you know what? We did. We ended up creating 14 new and 5 expanded critical wildlife areas around the state. And it happened in large part because of Audubon chapters just like this one. You'll see that is actually Rob Williams, bottom right, from Apalahee Audubon fame, who came over to the Fish and Wildlife Commission meeting in St. Augustine where they were considering establishment. But for each of the public meetings, Audubon volunteers showed up. And they not only said, you really need to do this, but they said, I know you really need to do this because I have volunteered stewarding these colonies. I have seen the disturbance happen. I have invested my energy and my sweat equity in it. And actually, I had one of the agency staff say to me, this is the politest and happiest public meeting I think I've ever had, because everybody came and looked at their proposal and said, not only is this good, but we want more. So this is a great example of using that power of the Audubon network and finding those places of common ground with decision makers who are in that position of authority. And it's something that we work hard at doing more of every year. So what I will say is we cannot do this without you. And so there are ways that you can be engaged. I'm not expecting that any individual person is necessarily going to mount their personal crusade on a particular issue and take it on all by themselves. We all do things better together. And so we want you to participate with all of us. One thing that you can do, you may not be able to see it on this screen, but if you go to flaudubon.org, at the top right, you'll find a little button there where you can sign up to get our advocate newsletter. And that comes out every week during legislative session, every week in the committee weeks before session, telling you what's happened, where the issues are, and how you can help. It gives you opportunities to engage with your decision maker. It'll also help flag for you when your elected official is in a particular position of power, like they may be the chair of a particularly relevant committee, which means that your voice has an outsized value during that legislative session. And you know, we've got a long history with it. These are some of the ladies of Florida Audubon Society with all of the petition signatures that they gathered to send to Congress to help to pass the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. And the thing that I find so inspiring about this is that so much of this work was done by women to affect legislation before they even had the right to vote. And this is what Audubon is all about. It is that everybody has something to contribute, everybody can make a difference, and together we can get more done than we do alone. And so I'll just end with, you know, for all of its foibles and internet memes, you know, every time you paddle over a panhandle spring or enjoy the sound of children's laughter over a marsh or breathe in that breeze that's coming off that thunderhead rolling in across cattlelands in Central Florida, you're reminded that for all of its shortcomings, Florida is still just such an amazing place and so very deserving of our work. And if not us, then who? So I hope that you guys will take some of this, be inspired, engage with us through our advocacy center, and help us continue to protect this fragile paradise that we're lucky enough to call home. And so with that, I will take some questions. I don't know why the last slide didn't show up, but that's okay. Awesome. Thank you. Oh, thank you, Judy. I paid her to say that. Yeah. Yeah. What's up, Ben?
One question I had was maybe, you know, is there statewide, you know, with all the chapters or even just local communities, things like that, is there one issue that people could jump onto that's like the most effective? That, you know, I know Florida is so different than we go. Have you seen that there is
Yeah, so for folks on Zoom, Ben was asking if there's one issue that is most relevant to the most people in Florida or the most chapters or the most regions. And, you know, it depends how basic you want to distill it down to. I will say that water and habitat tend to be pretty uniting for people. And, but different communities are at different places on that path. And so the ways that they engage may be a little bit different. Like I said, we work on water, wildlife, habitat, and climate in Florida. And those four things tend to be kind of those gravitational issues that mobilize people. Luckily, we do have regional conservation committees with our chapters. So that means that the chapters in each of 7 regions come together quarterly to share issues and opportunities and solutions. Is that working? I think it is. Crowdsource solutions, as well as helping us to kind of set priorities for the coming year. And so I guess I would say, I think that there is more kind of consensus at that regional level for the most relevant priority rather than statewide, just because regionally just things land differently. So sorry, I don't have like that one ring to rule them all, you know, but it's, we're Florida, we're complicated. Other questions? Yes, Donna. Yeah. Oh, sure. No.
To support not only the law, but I'm going to support any group of laws for what I want. I don't feel like I'm very effective for that. You gave us some good tips. I feel following your emails, and there's a letter that I can paraphrase. I don't need to use the same letter.
That's good.
I would rather spend my grandchildren, you know, mainly this. And so I rather just give money, your group, and also to 2,000 from Florida, and you're all supporting the same thing. More people that law they're better off than one. So for anybody that's in the retirement years, I would really strongly recommend it. You didn't mention money, but
so to repeat for the people on Zoom that may not have been able to hear Donna, she was saying that she's not as engaged in personally advocating, but she tends to support philanthropically groups like Audubon that do lobby, and she feels good about that and effective. And I agree, Donna. She also mentioned that we have advocacy alerts that go out through that advocate that will often say, here's the decision maker that you need to write to, and here's roughly what you need to say. And Donna was saying she tends to tailor those letters in her own words, and that is the best possible thing that you could do. Even better than that is if you're willing to pick up the phone and make a 1-minute phone call to that decision maker's office and say your piece, and then put down the phone, because so many groups now use action alerts like that, where, you know, send a letter to your decision maker, that they almost get a little tone deaf when they're receiving many, many, many emails, many of which are identical or similar. And so, you know, if 5 or even 10 constituents that live in their district actually take the time to pick up the phone and call, wow, that's a big deal. So, pro tip. Okay. Oh, there's another question here online. It says, recently there have been news articles about conservation easements being canceled by developers or local governments. Does Audubon Florida have a team working on how to make conservation easements work? Yes. So I think what David is alluding to is that there have been conversations about easements in particular that tend to be older and may have been held by water management districts or others in the course of mitigation that don't have kind of the ironclad in perpetuity language in them that the state now employs. So when the state engages in Florida Forever, our conservation land buying program, rural and family lands, they are very clear about the duration of those purchases. There is a provision in state law that allows for the state to declare something no longer needed for conservation purposes, and it is a super high bar. It happens very, very rarely. So I'm glad to say that I think, I'm throwing a little shade, I think some of the concerns over the relinquishment of easements may be a little exaggerated. I think it is largely those older mitigation easements, and the majority of the Florida Forever purchases and other land conservation buying that we see for easements do have really protective language in it, as well as organizations like Audubon and other who are watchdogs when agencies think about surplusing. So you may remember about 2 years ago, the St. Johns River Water Management District actually had a small item on their consent agenda that just kind of randomly said, approving list of lands for consideration for surplus. Audubon actually noticed it on the consent agenda and said, whoa, what the heck is this? And, you know, reached out and engaged with them. And it was largely it was a staff exercise that had, in my opinion, gotten a little carried away. And, you know, we were ultimately able to talk to the leadership there as well as the administration, who said, yeah, that's not a good idea, and ultimately withdrew it from the agenda and have not revisited it. So yes, occasionally mischief occurs, and that's why it is important, like Donna was saying, that there are folks doing the very glamorous work of reading governing board agendas and other incredibly exciting things like that. So not all heroes in conservation wear hip boots. Yes. Go ahead. Yes, so he's bringing up the Miccosukee Greenway, and some of that is decision making that's happening at a local level too. So not all protected lands are state lands, and not all of them have the same provisions in them. You're right about that. But I will say you also have to be careful just with road building in general because of eminent domain. Oftentimes they can take land, and one of our concerns with Audubon is that sometimes road builders look at conservation lands and say, wow, that's the path of least resistance. I don't have to displace anybody. And so we have been very vocal about saying it needs to be like bloodletting if it's going to happen. It needs to be so expensive and so painful that nobody ever looks at it and says, yeah, let's do that. You know, instead it should be, oh my God, surely there's another way. And so, you know, but that doesn't always happen at the local level like it should. Dana, did you have a question?
Further you get away from that, because competitions become more and more good. And I would say if someone worked at the state agency for 30 years, it was common to put lower level staff to call all around Florida. Alert them to
That for the folks on Zoom, that comment has been redacted to protect the innocent. But yes, you're completely right that that agency staff, especially at the lower levels, really do care deeply, and oftentimes they've got substantial longevity too. So they hold a lot of institutional knowledge. The higher up you go in the organization, yes, leadership often tends to be more politically appointed, and also may not have as long a tenure in an agency, and as a result, you know, less institutional knowledge about how things have been done and why. So Audubon works with those folks too, because we like to think of ourselves as kind of the external memory bank, you know, for here's what happened last time this thing was contemplated and it didn't go so well. This is why maybe let's not do it. What do you think? So it's a fun job. Other questions? Well, thank you so much for having me. Engage in your community. Love Florida and go Audubon. Okay. Thanks everybody online.